tonight. Let's talk Newcastle, though. Steve Bruce has left the club 13 days after the takeover of the club was completed. As I said, Neil Lennon is at Old Trafford. Karen Carney is with us for the first hour. George Culkin, the senior writer at The Athletic, joins us. And Alan Shearer is with us as well. I think everybody knows each other. Alan, Neil, you know each other, yeah? You've been in contact before?
He was up in Scotland.
Sorry?
He was up in Scotland playing a bit of golf, choppers. ripping up Loch Lomond, so he was.
Yeah, I know. That's it. Just travels the country doing golf now. That's Alan. Before we get everybody's thoughts on Newcastle, Ian, take us through what happened today.
Well, it was around 10:30 this morning that Newcastle United confirmed that Steve Bruce had left his position. They say by mutual consent. Newcastle United placed on record their gratitude and contribution, while Steve himself said he was grateful to everyone for the opportunity to manage what he described as a unique football club. Graham Jones, supported actually by Steve Bruce's coaching staff, Stephen Clements and Steve Agnew, will take charge now on a temporary basis, and certainly for the Crystal Palace away game at the weekend, and that alone suggests that a permanent replacement isn't imminent.
Alan, inevitable?
I think so, yeah. I think it was right for both parties, as tough as it will be for Steve and his family to take, because as you know, I'm a friend of his, and I know how hard it's been for them to take the criticism. But Steve's big enough and strong enough to know that once you go into that side of management, you have to accept criticism when you don't win games. And he hasn't won enough games this season. In fact, he hasn't won any games this season. So I think it was inevitable. The job he's done over the last 2 years, I think, has been very good in the circumstances. It was an almost impossible club to manage, I think, in the circumstances, and every manager that has been in over the last 14 years has found it very, very difficult. In fact, we had an unbelievable manager here in Rafa Benitez, and he didn't want to carry on. He left. He chose to go elsewhere because he couldn't manage the football club the way he wanted it. So, and that's what made it very difficult for Steve coming in. Hence me, when he asked me, telling him not to take it.
Neil, you more than most, I think, being the one who's done the manager job at a variety of clubs, will understand this from Steve Bruce. I know Alan says, he's strong and he's tough. He said this with the Telegraph today with Luke Edwards. By the time I got to Newcastle, I thought I could handle everything thrown at me. But it has been very, very tough to never really be wanted, to feel that people wanted me to fail, to read people constantly saying I would fail, that I was useless, a fat waste of space, a stupid, tactically inept cabbage head or whatever, and it was from day one.
Yeah, it's pretty damning, that, and I feel for him. I think he was pushing water up the hill the whole time he was there. I mean, I think the Newcastle fans wanted a big name in after Benitez left, and Steve obviously wasn't big enough for them for whatever reason. Obviously he managed Sunderland, which he probably had to win them around a little bit with that. But if you look at his 2 seasons, to finish 13th and 12th on a very limited budget, it's pretty good management. This season's been difficult. They've only brought in Willock, really, so he's not really been backed, and he has been sort of a punch bag for Mike Ashley in that respect as well. So you touched on it earlier, so did Alan. There was an air of inevitability about it. He's not a bad manager. He's not technically inept. All these things are said. They demean managers these days, and it's really unfair when you've got a guy there who's managed pretty much at the highest level for the most of his career and just done his 1000th game, which is a remarkable achievement, Choppers. I think he's been treated very, very poorly by people.
Although there will be people, Karen, Newcastle fans, who will look at some of their performances and go, how have it? For example, 2-3 times they tried to play the offside trap against Tottenham, and they were absolutely all over the place. So there are going to be people, and this is not in an abusive way, but will quite rightly go, tactically, what were they trying to do at times? But is that just down on Bruce? Is that on players?
It's on everyone, including the club, really. Look at the investment that he's had. I can understand because they did have, like last season, they went, I think, 11 games unbeaten. You're right, you watch games. I remember watching them at Brentford actually in the Cup, and I was thinking, what are they doing tactically? But I guess, and they haven't won a game this season. So, you know, when the owners come in and they're looking at it from a business perspective, they haven't won a game, we're not playing particularly well. It's been for a large period of time, then they're looking at it from a business point of view, and probably so are the fans. But from our perspective and from a human perspective, we look at, well, the investment that he's had, and actually if you look at points ratio, over 2 full seasons, he's actually equalled Rafa Benitez. And you look at statistically, they're both very, very similar. So I feel for him because he's had his hands tied, like the gentlemen have all said.
Gentlemen, thanks, Karen.
That's all right. You are.
Karen, you obviously don't know me very well, do you?
Oh, bless you. No, you
were all going so well until you mentioned the word gentleman.
I know. Did my credibility just go out the window there? But no, I just think, like, you're only as good as what you can invest. And I look at that squad and I'm like, yes, you can be organised. Yes, you can try and be structurally good. But sorry, the teams like Championship, you know, they're not good enough. They're not good enough, and no manager in the world can make them better. You have to have good players, and everyone else is invested. And like the disparity is just, it's going like, or even if you don't invest, you've got to do something with the academy, or do something like a Brentford, do something different, and try and get competitive advantage in a different way. And they just haven't.
But then again, fans quite rightly would say, Alan,
yep,
if you're a coach, improve some of these players.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that. I understand that. That is part of your job. But sometimes that's very difficult. And I look at the investment side of things, and an argument also from a section of Newcastle fans will say, well, he's had the investment. He spent on Jamal Lewis, he spent on Joe Willock, he spent on Callum Wilson. Well, that's fine, but if you look at the grand scheme of things over 14 years, if I'm correct in saying, I think the net spend has been 130 million over 14 years. My maths isn't that great, but it's round about 10 million, £9.5 million per year. Now, yeah, I also know that, do you get 130 million for staying in the Premier League nowadays, and have done for a considerable amount of time now? So over the grand scheme of things, over the 14 years, there's hardly been any investment on the playing side of which is the most important thing. And there certainly hasn't been an investment in the ground because it's fallen apart, and there certainly hasn't been an investment in the training ground because it's the same training ground as I left, other than a lick of paint, in 2006. So I understand where people say about Wilson and Lewis and Willock, but you need more than that to compete. And Neil said they wanted a bigger manager. They had a bigger manager here in Rafa Benitez. He didn't want to be here. Why didn't he want to be here? Because he couldn't manage. He couldn't manage the way he wanted to. That tells you that Steve was up against it from day one, hence me saying to him that I didn't think he could take the job, because it was an almost impossible club to manage under the current circumstances.
Let's look at what happens now. George Culkin, as I say, from The Athletic is with us. Evening, George.
Good evening. I have a lot that I would like to say about the previous bit, but if you need to move on, that's fine.
No, go on. I'll never deny you anything, George, as you're well aware. So go on.
I mean, perhaps a point which sort of goes to sort of prove everybody's point in some ways is that there was around 100 million quid of spending under Steve Bruce's time as head coach. One of the big problems was he came in when the club had already committed to signing Joe Linton, for example, and Saint-Maximin, and they were brought in with no thought to who the coach was going to be or what to do with them, and that was something very difficult for him to inherit, albeit he signed them off in public. So when they did, they actually have spent a decent chunk of money in the last 2 years. It's just that it was unfocused, and I mean, I do have a point to make about the sort of this idea that he's either been hounded out or abused from the start. It's very complicated, but Benitez represented hope to Newcastle fans. So when he left, a lot of that hope left with him. 10,000 people walked away from the club. They had to give away 10,000 part-season tickets that summer. And so it's not that people want... I mean, Steve Bruce saying that people wanted him to fail. They didn't. They wanted him to succeed. The fear was that this was a kind of regression to how it had been before Benitez. And so there was that mood from the start, and that was very, very difficult for him. And I would also just say that sort of within the stadium, albeit people have been calling for him to go this season, it's been this football without fans. It's been football in empty stadiums, and the debate has therefore gone online. And so there's no sort of filter to that. But it's not been horrible abuse within the stadium. It's just been people saying that 7 wins in 38 games and no wins at all this season is not good enough.
Who made the decision for him to go, and who is making the decision on who their next head coach manager is?
It's a great question, Mark, and it's difficult.
It's not very often Chappers ask good questions, George.
Thanks very much, Alan. Note that down, please.
I'm not going to jump.
He's a gentleman, that's why.
Very good, Karen.
Yeah. So, I mean, the decision was, the button was pressed on the decision only on Monday night. There was a board meeting in London with the key figures now at the club, but it had been the case from day one, or actually a long time before day one, that Steve Bruce would go, and it's made for a messy sort of 13 days when there were soundings that he was going to go straight away, and then of course didn't. And the big decisions, I think it's pretty clear, are going to have to go back to Saudi Arabia, to PIF, because they have the 80% share of the club, and it's taken too long. I mean, I think we would all agree on that. I think it would have been better for everyone to have had the clean break last week, and for even if it was just Graham Jones in the dugout for Tottenham, for that to happen. And so what happens moving forward, and how this decision-making process evolves, is going to be fascinating. So you've got 3 different strands to the ownership, where one takes the final decision, or one will be responsible for taking the final decision, but probably has little football knowledge. And so, and they're also being bombarded with names left, right and centre at the moment.
Well, I'll do the names in a little while. Alan, I know you've got to go very shortly, so before I let you go, what kind of manager do they need right now? And is the manager they get right now going to be in place in 18 months' time?
Well, first and foremost, what has to happen, or what is imperative, and the only thing that's important at this moment in time, is that they're in a relegation battle. They're in a massive relegation battle, and they need to, for however it happens, stay in the league this season. And there are so many big decisions to be made, and choices to be made. For example, one is obviously the manager or head coach, whatever they want to appoint. 2, are they going to go down a director of football route, or a technical director, or however you want to describe that? 3, are they going to have a chief executive come in and run the football side of things, or the football club? So from that point of view, the next few months are hugely important, but the most important thing is trying to avoid relegation at whatever cost, because that would obviously set them back a year, depending where or how. Although,
Alan,
at the beginning of January, that depends on which players might or come into the football club.
That would only set them back a year, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about this a fair bit recently, because everybody keeps saying, massively important they stay in the Premier League, massively important they stay in the Premier League. Well, we always hear it's important to stay in the Premier League because of the finances. Well, that isn't surely a concern for them anymore. So,
yeah, I think also it's important. No one wants to be relegated. It's certainly not a nice feeling. But I think if the worst were to happen, and that did happen, and don't get me wrong, no one wants that. And obviously we don't like talking about it, but we have to, because it is a reality in the situation that they're in, and they obviously can spend money. January. But that, again, I think that will depend on who comes and where they are in the league. But if it happens, then yes, it would put them back a year, and they would have to face up to that. It wouldn't be a complete disaster. And I also think the fans would look at that and say, okay, well, that's happened, and it certainly wouldn't have been a disaster if it happened under the current manager or the previous ownership, because they know now they've got a little bit of hope and they've got that excitement, and they know that they're in the situation where they can look forward rather than just flatline like we have been for 14 years.
Alan, do you think they'll hang on another fortnight, try and get through to the international break, and then look to try and make an appointment in that time?
That wouldn't surprise me, Deno. I think that's maybe why they've done it now, to see and talk to the options that they have, and that will give them a little bit of time. Obviously, getting the right result at the weekend would buy them more time. I sort of understood how and why they got to this decision to keep Steve on, because I don't know this, but my guess is the takeover happened that quickly. It took everyone by surprise, and they were sort of caught in the middle of, oh my God, how do we replace that? How do we do that? And but the good thing is that the communication, we've had more communication in the last 10 days out with Newcastle United than we have in the previous 14 years. That has to be a good thing moving forward. But you also, it's when you've got a manager there, all right, do you get rid of them? But we haven't got anyone else to come in. You've got a coach who's been working alongside him. Well, okay, his ideas should have been in there in the first place. People will say that and look at that. But a fresh voice, someone in charge. He hasn't got Steve to look at now and to contend with. So it'll be really interesting to see what he goes in with on Saturday against Crystal Palace, because I think Steve was aware of the football that the Newcastle fans wanted. But he was also aware of what squad and what team he had, because he wanted to go and attack, and he wanted to play 4 at the back and be more adventurous. But I think with the players that we had, it was always going to be very, very difficult to try and open up a bit. And without Callum Wilson, Newcastle haven't got a threat. They haven't got anyone that can put the ball in the back of the net. So to actually go and play 4 at the back and 1 or 2 up front is very, very difficult without Callum Wilson.
Gentlemen, Al, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys. Thank you.
Alan Shearer on 5 Live Sport. Karen, you look at the names, and George will tell us if any of these are genuinely being considered. But and agents are going to throw names out there, aren't they, to try and get their person linked with the job, right? Paulo Fonseca, Lucien Favre, Eddie Howe, Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard, Antonio Conte, and Roberto Martinez. If they are all on the list, does that imply they have any idea what kind of manager they want? Bearing in mind they're all different.
Yeah, that's the point. They're all different, but the bottom line is you're in a relegation zone. So you're looking at Paulo. He plays attacking-minded football and possessive-based football. Well, you don't have the players to do that. So good luck with that. If you want to play out with the current team they've got, then you're going to find yourself in a very sticky situation. I think Eddie Howe, again, young progressive manager. Frank Lampard, the same. But you need players for this. So it's about the window as well. It kind of has to marry together. I think they have to be organised. I'm hearing reports that don't have a massive budget in this window, that maybe the fans and we're all expecting. So I just think they need to, and again, this manager isn't the end manager that's probably going to give them what we all think they're going to have in the next 10 years. It's another stopgap manager. I mean, just think of how many managers it took City to get Pep, and the process is to get to the person that they wanted. But the reality is they're in a relegation battle, so they've got to find someone that can make them hard to beat, defensively solid, and get results and quick. And so is a young manager going to do that? It's inexperienced. I don't know. Is a progressive attacking manager going to do at the current players? Don't think so. So they're going to have to really think hard, because I know we spoke about dropping down a league potentially and being a year. But that's if they get back up. The Championship is a really tough league. Yeah. You can't take that for granted. And there's been many teams that have been relegated and haven't come straight back up, no matter what budget. because it's about players. Do they want to step down in that league? You're going to have to pay them. So it's just a really interesting and kind of weird dynamic that they're in at the moment.
George?
Yeah, no, those questions that Karen are asking are exactly the questions that are being asked internally as well, because when you look at it, Newcastle don't just need one manager, they actually need about 4 managers. They need somebody to get them out of the relegation zone now. They need a club builder, because it's not just, yes, they're in the Premier League, yes, they've got a fantastic stadium that we all kind of love going to, but they need their facilities to be updated at the training ground, as Alan said, and they need to be reconnected to their academy. They need somebody to do that. They need to get up from 17th to 10th and 10th to 6th. They need, and then finally, they've already stated what their ambition is. They need a winner. Now, all of those things don't necessarily happen all at the same time, but it does make it very, very difficult to sort of to make this first appointment, because there are so many sort of things being thrown at them. And yeah, again, Fonseca, someone who they have talked to, or certainly parts of the ownership group have talked to, plays attacking football, but with the way Newcastle are defending at the minute, that's not much use. Eddie Howe, has been mentioned internally, has been talked about internally. Built Bournemouth, did brilliantly there, but Bournemouth is very different to Newcastle, and latterly at Bournemouth he was relegated. So really, the sort of fascinating and sort of sad thing is that this is a model that's kind of really built for Rafa Benitez, who of course was very much part of Staveley's first bids to buy the club 4 years ago. Named in those contracts, keeping him was named in those contracts, and there have been moments when it looked like it might align him being able to come back, but and he knows the club as well as everything else, and still knows a lot of the players there, but that just won't work because he won't leave Everton. So can you find a one-size-fits-all manager at this point, or do you need to look at the short term and try and stabilise where they are and get through this season first and foremost?
I'm told, George, though, that there is firm interest in Eddie Howe. He is in the frame.
Yeah, he's definitely been talked about. They were considering a list of possible managers last week when it looked like Steve Bruce might go last week. I don't think Eddie Howe was on that list, but he has been talked about. And again, this comes back to who will make the decision, how will the decision be made, and there are then sort of wider issues about what sort of structure are they going to have. Let's not forget that Lee Charnley is still there as managing director. They don't have a CEO. Amanda Staveley and Mirdad Guddusi have the contract to run the club, but they haven't made any of their own appointments in that field. They have football advisors, but they haven't been taken on permanently by the club. Do they want a sporting director? Do they want a technical director? Do they want director of football? Do they want a manager? All those things. And if they do want those things, how do they appoint a manager first, and who do they go for? And it is just worth repeating this thing. It's not kind of very sexy, but they're right at the sort of beginning of this stuff. And I'm told sort of a report into structures might take a month to compile. I'm not saying the manager would take that long to kind of get in, but it's really difficult, and they've got a huge amount of decisions. And I think one of the reasons, that they were saying last week that one of the things about hanging on to Steve Bruce for the moment was that this one decision inevitably leads to another 4 decisions or another 5 decisions. And so if he could have got them a win at the weekend, perhaps that would have saved them a bit of time, but no, not to be.
Karen?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we're looking at it from a club's perspective, but it's got to be right for a manager as well. If you're like a Frank Lampard or a Steven Gerrard, knowing that there's 4 people that are probably going to come after you. So if I'm like Frank Lampard, just coming off the back of Chelsea, do I want to make my reputation again be kind of, bit like, or even Gerrard, you come off your back of, say, Rangers, for example, doing really well. You go to Newcastle, will that affect my reputation and my next move? And I think managers have to be selfish again. Eddie Howe, it's got to be attractive for them, and I'm not sure, like what we're all saying, it seems attractive for managers at this moment because it's such a transitional period.
And that's what I was going to say to Neil, actually, within the managerial community, if somebody goes up to you and says, yeah, we will appoint you, but you may just be a stopgap. On the one hand, that sounds like quite a negative way. On the other hand, are there lots of people who would snap their hands off just to be a stopgap?
Good question. Probably some people would do it for the money. No question of that. But I don't think any of those names will be in contention, really. I think they'll go big and they'll go early and they'll give the guy whatever he wants. I think they have to. This sort of stopgap idea is just, bonkers. They'll come in with a big reputation. They've got a bottomless pit of money. And I think they'll go and try and get.
But they might not be able to.
And it's not how they're going to do it.
That bottomless.
Why wouldn't they do it, George?
Well, because obviously there are kind of restrictions in place in terms of how they can spend, but it's from day one they've been saying it's just not how they're going to do it. It is going to be measured. They can't just. They're not going to buy a player for £100 million in January because it just doesn't fit with what they need, or
No, I get that on the player front. I'm talking about the manager himself. We'll give him 4 or 5 years and say, look, you build this club, we'll back you financially. When the time's right. I just don't see them. I don't see them going for. Would Eddie Howe appeal to the punters after what's been going on? Would a young manager appeal? I don't know. If they want success, they go up against Klopp, Guardiola eventually. Go up against Rodgers, go up against all these big name managers. Then they've got to get someone that fits that criteria.
And that's the final question, really, in all of this, George. Right? Which is, you went right back to the beginning in your first answer of the difference between Benitez and Bruce as regards the relationship with the fans. And Benitez gave them hope. So, a pragmatic manager who would keep them, there's no guarantee, I saw Roy Hodgson mentioned somewhere today, right, as an example.
But
right?
surely Chap was what Steve was he not? Deemed that way.
Yes, but maybe that relationship had become so toxic that just couldn't be sustained.
Fairly or otherwise, Steve Bruce was seen, as I say, as a sort of reversion to type under Mike Ashley, and again, I'm saying fairly or otherwise, that meant Newcastle were. All they cared about was sort of mediocrity.
So therefore, the new manager has to bring hope.
Well, I think hope has already returned. I think that's the thing. I think the takeover itself changes. Has changed that, and I think now. Changing the dugout has also sort of changed that, because it just needed to happen. It just needed to happen. Again, I'm not saying that as a reflection on Steve Bruce, but he was, as Alan said, he became the public face of Mike Ashley's Newcastle, and it was a failing club, and it was a team that's been failing certainly over the last 38 games. So it's been very, very difficult, and I think that decision gives everybody a second lift. There was the lift of the takeover happening, and then it's a second lift. And I think trust will be. It's not that Newcastle are desperate to get in the Champions League tomorrow, or Newcastle fans are desperate to get into the Champions League tomorrow. I think widely there is, a huge amount of sort of understanding, and a huge amount. They want something to believe in. They want something to be part of again. They want to feel connected again, and. That's the key thing. So there will be patience. There will be patience. It's about having something to kind of grow with, I think. And I think hope is back. But having said that, it is a really difficult decision, deciding what it is that they actually need now.
George, thank you very much. George Culkin from The Athletic, Karen and Neil Lennon and Ian Dennis staying with us this evening